It's the year 1967, and while the rest of the world is busy planning their summer of love, the relentless engineers at Mercedes-Benz are setting the scene for a top-secret project, which should last for more than a decade and result in the most stunning line of experimental vehicles in the history of experimental vehicles. Never before and never thereafter has an automaker put so much effort over more than a decade into the development of cars that they never intended to sell to anybody. Not a single one. This was a giant research project just for the sake of science and technological progress. It's such a unique and extraordinary story, it just deserves to be told. So let's get that done. To get a feeling of how spacey that whole project was, you have to understand what kind of company Daimler-Benz was in the late 60s. It was probably one of the most serious and conservative companies in the whole industry. These guys weren't joking around. The product portfolio was extremely limited compared to today and very much focused on luxury. The cheapest model was an E-Class, above came the S-Class, the SL and the mighty 600 for all the kings and dictators out there. That was it. They were selling 10% of today's volume and were the undisputed king of luxury cars. And for the younger viewers out there was no such thing as an A45. It just didn't exist. And in the midst of that era, Project C111 was born. In 1967, a team was set up around the project leader Dr. Hans Liebold. He reported to his chief engineer, the great Rudolf Uhlenhaut, father of the 300 SLR Uhlenhaut Coupe, among many others. The job? Create a laboratory on wheels to test and develop all kinds of new technologies. Above all, the application of Wankel rotary engines. Already in 1961, Daimler-Benz had purchased the license to produce Wankel engines, and the hopes were high that this tech had a great future. Besides the engine, more innovations were to be applied, like new suspension geometries, body materials and aerodynamics. And all that stuff had to be implemented into a radically new vehicle type. The engineers pulled up their sleeves and for the very first time, with the help of computers, created the initial concepts and designs. In February 1969, they started building the first prototype. The pressure was high and they had to be quick. After less than 2 months, the result was presented and visually, it was what you would call quick and dirty. Internally, it was called Hobel, which is German for this, a wood plane. It was refined here and there over the next weeks and received a little facelift, but basically remained a Hobel on the exterior. But make no mistake, underneath its botchy body was already a fully functional prototype with a 3-rotor Wankel engine, which was able to complete a major testing program on the test track in Stuttgart-unter-Turkheim, at Hockenheim, on the Nürburgring and even on public roads. Daimler was still trying to keep this project a secret. The world should have a first look at the car on the Frankfurt Motor Show in September 1969. So there was still a bit of work to do in the upcoming months. They had to finish the design for excellent interior and give the car a new name. Peugeot insisted that all numbers with the center 0 were theirs. And that was how the C111 was born. While the Hobel prototype was running its testing program, the engineers and designers back in Sindelfingen were working on its final disguise to make it look good for the IAA. With its mid-engine layout, it was already clear that this Mercedes was supposed to get a completely new design, with proportions unlike any Mercedes ever before. Responsible for the styling was the great Bruno Sacco, who years later would become head of the Mercedes-Benz Styling Center. He created an extremely wedge-shaped Gran Turismo of radical simplicity. This was not like Sacco's 1966 SLX design study of a mid-engine sports car. The C111 was much more pure and clinical and technical, featuring straight lines and clear surfaces. When you look at the sports cars that you could buy in 1969, an E-Type, a 911, a 275, a Spitfire, it's obvious that this C111 was a very advanced design, much more 80s than 60s. As a highlight and to emphasize its significance, the car received gull-wing doors, something Mercedes has never done in the 15 years since the launch of the 300 SL. Besides some technical reasons to go that way, this was clearly a statement of how serious and how proud Mercedes was with this car. From the very beginning, aerodynamics played an important role in the development of the C111. The engineers wanted to prove that a sports car could be low drag and efficient, while at the same time ensuring a safe and well-balanced level of downforce on front and rear, without any add-on pieces like flicks or spoilers that would disturb the clean styling. But the core of the C111, and basically the main reason for the whole program, was this. A 150 kilo, 1.8 litre, 280 horsepower, 3-rotor Wankel engine. It was the hottest shit of engine technology in this era, and many at Daimler-Benz believed that it would fundamentally change the way their cars are being powered in the future. And there were some good reasons to believe in it. The Wankel engine is compact, light and simple compared to a piston engine. Plus, it can rev much higher and almost free from any vibrations. Sounds all very good, but there were a few downsides which we are getting to in a minute. But for the moment, let's assume it's a great idea and put it in the C111. On July 15, 1969, the first C111 was sent to Hockenheim to start testing. Uhlenhaut himself was at the wheel and he was certainly a bit underwhelmed. The 3-rotor engine was lacking power and torque, and the quality of the fiberglass body was a disappointment. Overall, this was far from satisfying. At least the newly integrated 5-link rear axle was a big improvement compared with the diagonal swing axle from an R107 that was still used in the first prototype, and in combination with the extremely wide tires was frankly dangerous. Anyway, the presentation for Frankfurt was set, the car received its iconic orange paint and was pushed on stage. And it was quite a sensation. Without doubt, the highlight of that year's Frankfurt Motor Show. This was the Mercedes sports car that everybody was dreaming of. Finally, since the 300 SL, a proper Gullwing was back on stage, with a breathtaking new shape and mind-blowing technology. Being able to do 0 to 60 in 5 seconds and run up to 160 miles per hour. Mercedes has built 5 cars of that first series C111 for an intense testing program and a driving event at the Hockenheim Ring for journalists and VIPs. It was clear that the C111 was still an experimental vehicle and that there was still a lot of work to do, especially on the engine side. But people loved the idea of a new Mercedes-Benz supercar, and rich guys from all over the world started to put their orders. But Mercedes kept saying no. The C111 was not built to earn money. Its purpose was to advance and display high-tech. And there was still plenty of room for improvement. So, heads down and back to work. While the public was still celebrating edition 1 of the C111, the teams in Stuttgart were already back at their drawing boards. Or at their computers, by the way, which was a first during the C111 development. Never before has a vehicle been engineered with the help of calculating machines, and Mercedes had the most powerful and capable calculating machines in the world. And if you wonder how that looked, watch this.
Alle diese Zahlen zusammengenommen ergeben, nunmehr in Lochkarten gestapelt, das Bild der Zeichnung auf dem Tisch. In diesem Paket ist also jetzt in Zahlen geordnet, was mal eine Zeichnung war. Und nun beginnt das harte Rechnen.
Well, I'm really happy that my channel is not about old computer technology, because frankly this is not exciting at all. Old cars, on the other hand, they are getting more exciting every year. It's about soul and design and beauty. So back to our C111. What were the major updates from Gen 1? First of all, they had to give the car the amount of power to match the looks. So they added 1 additional rotor to the Wankel engine, increasing its capacity and torque by 1/3 and the performance to 350 horsepower. That would give the C111 a top speed of 300 km per hour. What enabled that was also the revised exterior. The design team, together with their aerodynamicists, improved the body significantly to bring down drag and increase the efficiency. For instance, the package of the front cooler and the position of air in and outlet was optimized to reduce lift above the front hood. For a better visibility all around, they lowered the cockpit and the belt line, increased the length of the side windows and opened the rear side panels. The overall drag coefficient was improved by 8% to a remarkable 0.325. And that's something you could feel when you look at the car. This evolution of the C111 was much sleeker and lighter and had the great proportions and the refinement that the first generation was still lacking. And this was the C111 that became so famous and iconic over the years. When people say C111, this is the car they are talking about, the C111-2. The first car was finished before Christmas 1969, and 5 more were following quickly. In March 1970, they had their first public appearance at the Geneva Motor Show. this orange Gullwing coupe was the undisputed star of the show and immediately became the most desired supercar of a whole generation. And the first test drives with journalists met all the expectations. With all the enthusiasm and excitement it triggered, it was clear that Mercedes had to think about a small series production version. People were dreaming of a worthy successor to the 300 SL Gullwing coupe, and this car seemed to tick all the boxes. And there was actually a board meeting to discuss all the options. But Mercedes remained totally focused on testing and improving the main technologies, the Wankel engine and the fiberglass body, and with both they were far from satisfied. During intense testing, the engine showed insufficient reliability, and the exterior did not meet the high standards of Mercedes-Benz quality. So they continued to test and improve, and test and improve, and test and improve. Until 1973, when the technology finally reached the required maturity. And that was when the oil crisis hit the markets. Within half a year, the price for one barrel had risen from 3 to 12 US. At the same time, the worldwide regulation of vehicle emissions became more and more strict. These circumstances killed all the hopes to see a Mercedes supercar be released into serious production, especially not with that Wankel engine that always had disadvantages in terms of emissions. So Mercedes pulled the plug out of the whole rotary engine program and turned the final C111-2 into something very different. The fastest diesel car in the world. Diesel engines were starting to become en vogue in the 70s for obvious reasons. They were fuel efficient, reliable and durable. But they were certainly not considered sporty or sexy. To change that public opinion of diesel engines, Mercedes took their all-new 5-cylinder 3-litre OM617 and implemented it into their orange Gullwing laboratory. And here it was, the C111-2D. To prove its performance, they took it to Nardo, on the biggest high-speed test track you could find. A 12.6 kilometer benched circle in the very south of Italy. Besides the new engine, the car received bigger fuel tanks, covered headlamps, closed wheels for lower drag. In June 1976, they started their legendary record chase, running in circles day and night, refueling every 2.5 hours.
Nach circa 2,5 Stunden wurde jeweils wie geplant ein Fahrerwechsel vorgenommen. Der Fahrerwechsel, das Auftanken des 140 Liter fassenden Kraftstofftanks, die Reinigung der Windschutzscheibe und eine kurze Kontrolle erfolgten jeweils innerhalb von 20 bis 30 Sekunden.
"60 hours later, the mission was accomplished. 16 world records were shattered. The average speed was above 250 kilometers per hour. That demonstration could not have been more impressive. The good old workhorse diesel engine turned out to be a rocket. And Mercedes discovered their joy with record runs. So they've given themselves a new challenge, to beat the very records that they've just set up. Chapter 3. The ambitious target was to increase the average speed to over 300 km per hour. This, of course, required a completely different kind of vehicle. Instead of the spacious two-seater Gran Turismo, they were to build a true record car, with reduced frontal area and outstanding aerodynamics. Design work on the third stage C111 began in early 1977. To optimize high-speed stability, the wheelbase was increased by 10 centimeters. At the same time, the width was reduced for lower drag. As a consequence, the seat for the co-driver had to go. Also because a huge duct went from front to rear to feed the charge air cooler. Not particularly passenger-friendly. Several scale models were built and tested and improved in the wind tunnel. The final result was a stunning design, an extremely slim and streamlined body. Something similar to a Volkswagen XL1, just some 36 years earlier. The drag coefficient was at an incredibly low 0.183, which even by today's standard is sensational. Underneath that body, there were also some major upgrades to reach the target of 300 km per hour. Mercedes wanted to stick to the diesel for marketing reasons. So basically, it was still the 3-litre 5-cylinder engine from a production 300D. But this time, they've increased the boost pressure, modified the camshafts and optimized piston cooling. From 190 horsepower in the C111-2, we were now at 230 horsepower in the C111-3. Together with a low-drag body, this should be good enough for the record. A rear fin was ultimately added to increase crosswind stability. Two vehicles were built. and in April 1978 sent to Nardo. This was the big moment for the team. Even the head of research and development, Professor Werner Breitschwert, was there to supervise the whole event. At midnight, the record run was started. On the 12-kilometer circle, it took 2 laps to reach top speed. Once that acceleration phase was completed, they were cruising along at around 325 kilometers per hour. Everything went as planned, except for a minor incident with a hedgehog. He survived. One collapsed tire, which led to a switch to the replacement car, and a second incident with another hedgehog. Sadly, this time, the hedgehog, I don't know any details, but certainly the car was driving irresponsibly fast. You could blame the hedgehog for crossing a test track during a record run, but ultimately the C111-3 killed a hedgehog. Apart from that, a total of 9 world records were shattered, with average speeds of around 320 km per hour. Particularly impressive and relevant for the diesel marketing story, the average fuel consumption was below 16 liters per 100 kilometers, which at these speeds is extremely efficient. The accomplished record run was breaking news worldwide and a huge success for Mercedes. But they wouldn't be Mercedes if they were completely satisfied. They already had the next big step in mind to take this even further. Chapter 4. Mercedes was obviously addicted to speed at the end of the 80s, and they haven't had enough yet. There was this famous world record of Mark Donoghue set up a few years earlier. He topped an average of 355 km per hour with this Porsche 91730. With a bit more power, this should easily be within reach for the C111. And records are there to be broken, so Mercedes put their heads down and created the next level C111. The good old diesel clearly had reached its performance limits with the previous generation, so they swapped it for something more powerful. The M117 V8 engine known from the S-Class and SL. Displacement of the series production engine was increased from 4.5 to 4.8 liters and 2 turbochargers were added. The result? 500 horsepower. Should be enough to beat the Porsche, but there were more headaches beyond the engine. Top speed was expected to be north of 400 km per hour, which meant totally different challenges for the tires and the aerodynamic stability of the car. So Michelin developed a special high-speed rubber and the team spent days and nights at the wind tunnel optimizing the exterior bodywork to realize the critical levels of downforce and drag. A highly sophisticated design was developed with a huge front splitter, an elongated rear overhang, low-mounted rear wings and a pair of vertical fins. The whole setup was even slightly asymmetric to compensate the forces caused by the benched curve. The stunning outcome, despite producing much more overall downforce, this body had even lower drag than the predecessor. Say hello to the C111-4. The rest of the story is quickly told. In May 1979, the car broke 5 world records. And most importantly for the ego of the Mercedes engineers, they've beaten that Porsche record. And this is a fabulous example of the significance of aerodynamics. The 917 needed more than 1,000 horsepower for its record run. The C111 didn't even have half of that power, and yet its top speed was 50 kilometers above the Porsche, setting up a world record with 404 kilometers per hour. So next time you take your car to the Autobahn, make sure to take off that roof rack. It does make you quicker. Regarding the C111-4, this car had delivered as planned and completed all its tasks. An astonishing achievement by that group of engineers and designers. Now it was time to let loose and celebrate. No, not yet. I'm not sure if many of you know this, but there was actually a C111-5. I've certainly never heard of it before I did the research for this video. It was never published and there was never really a finished car. But there was a full-scale design model and it was tested in the wind tunnel. Here's a few rare pictures that you won't find on the internet, and I think they are very impressive. What you see does not look like 1980 at all. This probably reminds you of Group C cars from 10 years later, or even some Le Mans prototypes from around 2010. And that shows you how far ahead of its time Mercedes had gotten with this C111 thing. It was just crazy, and the engineers and designers had an insane level of freedom and obviously enjoyed using it. But at the same time, it had all gotten a bit out of control. Starting with the third generation, this project was obviously more and more losing touch with the normal business of Mercedes-Benz. It had become a chase for records by a team of petrolheads with cars that had not much to do with the real world anymore. Fascinating machines for sure, but frankly more and more out of place.
Als Fahrer saß der Leiter der PKW-Vorentwicklung selbst, Dr. Hans Liebold, hinter dem Lenkrad.
So in spring of 1980, the Mercedes board pulled the plug, and the whole C111 saga from one day to the next was suddenly over. Since then, these amazing cars are sleeping in the Mercedes Museum or in some secret places around Stuttgart. Every now and then, one version of the second series gets to drive a few miles with some journalists or celebrities. It keeps the memories of this stunning orange Gullwing alive, which is absolutely fantastic.
I love closing this door.
Obviously, I would have preferred to see this thing reach series production. It would have perfectly filled the massive void between the 300 SL and the SLS AMG, in which for more than 50 years we didn't have a Gullwing from Mercedes. But as things went, after more than a decade and 16 experimental cars built, the C111 story was forever over. Let's all hope that the next Gullwing gap won't take half a century. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.